Hey guys, welcome back to Global League Review. Here we have the 800s match. So, all right, 800s. I was like, all right, beginners. Let's get some weird matches in here. So here we have a grit versus a Kindle in high funds. So this will be cool. I don't really know what happens. Actually, no. I actually did click through this one. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how grit does. At the beginning levels of play, and especially on a map Dragon Blood that I'm familiar with some old variants, but I'm not too familiar with the newest version. So it'll be cool to sort of see how it plays now. Okay, so the players are Ikaros, who is 840 with 200 games played, and Intensive with 832 and goodness gracious, like 350 games played. Wow. Intensive is right. Okay. So let's get into it. All right. So, all right. Normal move, normal move. Okay. Instant T Copter from Kindle. Let's see. For versus Grit, I'm usually thinking like maximize the number of tanks and recons I have. I'm usually not thinking about going for an economic opening, but we'll see how good the T-Copter is. It probably doesn't slow things down too much. So if I see a T-Copter here, I might be thinking about T-Copter too, but I'm not sure. Okay, T-Copter in response. Yeah, it's fine. Um, Also, economic, and I guess a T-Copter is a pretty good blocking unit. So that can be nice for artillery walls later. Okay, normal opening, going for the base, going for the base. All right. Capturing here and down looks pretty good. T-copter forward. This is how I remember the T-copter opening working in the old version of the map, which is like you can boost the infantry. You can go like center and like accelerate this, or another option you could do is back when this tile was a port instead of a city, you could accelerate the port capture and try to snipe it for yourself, which is sometimes pretty good. Let's see what they do here. Okay, so followed up by B-Copter. B-Copter's great because it doesn't get hit by artillery. Okay, Grit B-Copter, not a huge fan, and also floating 8K. So you probably want to have built an artillery from this base. And the B-Copter, I'm not a huge fan of. You could have even done rocket from this base. So yeah, B-Copter I think doesn't really solve any of Grit's problems on this front, so I'm not big into it. Okay, recon from intensive, so that's already showing some pretty good matchup knowledge. Recon into Grit is a pretty big nuisance, and then the anti-air here is kind of like you have to respond to the B-Copter with anti-air, but anti-air is also good against Grit infantry, so now there kind of has to be a tank here instead of an artillery. So yeah, Grit is kind of off to a shaky start when it comes to his initial vehicle builds. And now floating 11K, the anti-air to respond to the B-Copter is, kind of forced in a pretty much this turn. And but yeah, you'd love to see an artillery here. Or yeah, probably not here yet, but definitely artillery here is my preference. Okay, so everything moves up a bit. This infantry actually got really spicy and went pretty deep, capturing here. We'll see how long I can hold on to that spot, onto that city. Okay, so the B-copter flies off to the center, maybe trying to meet up with this other B-copter where it can sort of do B-copter zoning things. Okay, and finally we get to artillery, which feel like they should have been built several turns ago. And even floating 7K here, so showing that one of these infantry could have been an artillery too. But having not gone that route, yeah, Grit is going to struggle to pump out enough artillery to like really get his numbers up. Okay, Neo Tank from this base is pretty interesting because that's one of the units that does get hit. That does get hit by artillery. So instead of like B-copter, like recon, where recon is cheap and kind of does the same thing as a like the Neo Tank to me doesn't really solve anything. It still gets hit by artillery for tremendous damage. Um, I mean, like less HP damage, but like a lot of funds damage. So yeah, the Neo Tank is a little dubious in my opinion. Yeah, also, this infantry kind of going deep instead of going for the comm tower cap. Um, Kind of an interesting idea. I think he kind of went the comm tower so that you know, do more damage and instead of like trying to, I guess you could argue that you want to pressure Grit immediately and like really trade out units with him ASAP. So maybe that's the rationale here. Okay, so now we're finally seeing full-fledged artillery spam. But see, I mean, the issue with not building artillery earlier is that Grit is floating 8K and he full bot with artillery. So like again, just to emphasize, like one of these infantry out here could be another artillery or another tank. And that's kind of one of the issues with floating money in high funds. Is that like sometimes it's hard to spend it with Grit, I guess. It's just hard to full buy out when everything you want to buy is like, you know, under 16K. So unless you're gonna like splurge on triple rocket or something, it can be hard to get your bank down. Okay, yeah. So the infantry gets involved here, trying to do some attacks. Um, Looks like both will die for it. And it's a little sketchy here. It's going to be exactly two artillery versus B-copter Neo Tank. I guess the Neo Tank can't. Okay, it can reach the forest, but the infantry can cover. Okay, now things look kind of. That artillery looks pretty much alone as here. You can still do things like kill the recon, anti-air onto the city, and then you're safe from the Neo Tank, and then you just bring the other anti-air up, and then you cover against the B-copter. Okay, I kind of like the B-copter. Oh, actually, that's in the middle of B-copter range, so now I need to support it with an anti-air instead of supporting this artillery that's really kind of on its own. Okay, and that's not really covered at all now. So now that's a free. It's a free Oko with the B-copter, so that's not good. Okay, and you don't get to take a shot with your artillery, which is pretty painful because now the anti-air is going to die and the B-copter is going to get a free shot off. So now you're forced to buy an anti-air here, which is not an indirect unit. So things are kind of spiraling out of control already. Okay, actually a grit bomber here. That's not really my vehicle of choice when faced against two anti-air and like no other targets. And it's like the Neo tank is too far away. Like the game's probably going to end by the time the bomber gets anywhere near the Neo tank. So I would probably rather um, maybe a rocket from this base and maybe like put even more pressure from this base down, which forces a response from blue instead of kind of allowing blue to kind of spend very little resources here. Okay, so that's a free KO there, and all that anti-air killed was an infantry, and now it dies, so that's not good. Okay, and the B-copter could have attacked from the city for the Oko, but it chooses not to. Okay, anti-air from city really hurts. The good news though for Grit is that there is a CO power available almost all the way there, and then that means that you can get good chip onto the Neo tank, which makes it a lot less threatening. Okay, and then a fighter to respond to the bomber. Seems kind of like an overbuild. I feel like you probably want to do a vehicle from this base instead. Okay, and actually, I probably would have rather seen damage in a different area, like cleaning up these units and then popping CO power. Okay, so not going for the CO power onto the Neo tank. Um, okay, I think this infantry should have been an artillery. Also, yeah, sorry, there's kind of a lot going on. Okay, so the Neo tank actually sacks itself going for this anti-air, which is a bit crazy because it just dies now. Okay, so a lot. So this triple tank spam stuff. This is gonna be pretty hard to deal with, since Grit is losing a lot of body blockers. Okay, that was a little inefficient using all three artillery to kill the Neo tank instead of just the two, and then using this guy to maybe block or maybe go into the city to heal. Okay, so now both players at Super CO power. Um, Being able to clear out both of these artillery with one shot seems pretty tantalizing. Um, yeah, we'll see what happens here. Actually goes for the wounded one. Yeah, it's a pretty juicy urban blight. Hitting this capture chain, which hasn't been captured yet, so would have liked to see that captured like 10 turns ago. And this com tower actually hasn't been captured yet, so wow. All right, yeah, that's tough. When you don't have your com tower for 10 turns, that can really slow you down. And then the B-copter jumps on the rocket. So it looks like both of these units will sack in order to do damage to the indirects. Oh, the tank gets on the artillery, so now we're in serious trouble here because there's no check to the anti-air. Okay, so both of the sacrificial units are gonna die. Oh, ho, ho, ho. All right, so with this attack, it looks like Grit didn't really check the damage calculator beforehand. Sometimes attacking Bomber onto anti-air is a good idea, but when it's a Kindle anti-air on a city, I would reconsider. But it looks like they probably learned something from that exchange, so that I would avoid. Getting the indirect count up again over here looks great. Another Urban Blight is so brutal when you're trying to cap up here. Oh man. So throughout this, okay, like the income has been relatively stable, like the pretty even, as what I mean to say. Super CO power comes out. It's like some decent ideas here. It's just hard to kill everything. Okay, so now this indirect clump is looking pretty scary. Although we're getting to the point where Grid falls off again, which is dealing with mega tanks, where he doesn't really have a great answer to that other than just hitting it with a ton of indirects, which is not always an option. Ooh, free fighter hit, which is really rough. I think our grid is taking too much damage here. The thing with grid is you kind of have everything go right for you, and then once you get past a certain point, you're invincible. But it does take a lot of work to get there. Oh man, another shot on the rocket, which is really rough. And actually an HQ cap too here. Okay, actually fighter gets to block the HQ, which is really rough. Although actually Grit probably doesn't care too much compared to most COs. The fact that this 5 HP infantry is like single-handedly bringing this medium tank away from this fight here and into the center to kill it is like really rough. That's the thing about HQ caps is like you can just have a very weak unit, like an otherwise very impactful unit, do like force a move from a very expensive unit. So yeah, this indirect ball is growing, but I think that the vehicle ball for Kindle is outgrowing it, outpacing it. Okay, so it actually activates the super here. So going for damage. That's a lot of that's a lot of one shots right there. And yeah, Grit not really having enough in the back to come up with an answer. So this looks like game here. Although it's felt kind of over for a while now. Okay, here comes the super. Yeah, see, I mean, like, every one of Grit's units here had a very valuable target, but there's still too much left over, so just a lot going on. Yeah, so all this stuff dies. There's a Neo tank left over, but it's Grit. Um, Not sure what's going to happen here, but I think this is the resign turn. Okay, yeah, the GG pipe runner. Yeah. Okay, so I think this probably pretty well demonstrates why Grit is a very difficult pick to use in high funds, which is like if you don't build up your indirects fast enough, then you can just kind of die to just like lots of vehicles, like equal numbers of tanks and artillery. The tanks usually win. It's just a matter of like having all the extra infantry block for the artillery that can make the difference. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't really recommend Grit and High Funds to anybody who, is looking to win and improve on their base gameplay. It's like a fun way to try to sort of challenge yourself, I'd say. Um, but I mean, the other thing too, just the way that the map committee um, does the ban tiers for high funds is that they kind of like structure it so that Grit is never the best pick, um, because then you get Grit, then you get Grit versus Grit, and those games are like horrible to play. So that's kind of, and it's kind of by design that Grit is usually never feels good in high funds. It's typically because they tier him so that he's not the best in the tier. So it's a conspiracy theory, and they have it out for him. But it's for the greater good, so it's not so bad. Cool. So thanks for tuning in for the 800s. Next up, we'll have the 900s.